On the night the Tempest was destroyed, the girl married for the second time. Lucas was asked if he would be willing to marry and take a Brillford mold to protect her for life. The girl was also asked if she was ready to take a man as her husband, having lived with him all her life, sharing joy and sorrow. She answered in the affirmative. She gave her consent and swore by life. It was all just for revenge. 5 months ago, the imperial jar. It was there to congratulate Her Majesty the Empress, for she was pregnant. Thoroughly surprised. After all, the girl decided to protect the child after 4 years of marriage and broke the news at the dinner table. The emperor didn't fully trust his woman to voice a child with him. Well, then it's another man Lucas is surprised a man-woman doesn't fully trust. I mean, she should have remembered who she slept with that night. Before the emperor decided to leave, for after such loud news, lazy food became tasteless. He informed his woman that she must now be forced to marry her previous fiancé. Lucas. 16 years ago, the crown prince was stripped of his status by a coup d'etat. He lost everything to the new emperor. So they gave him the title of duke, putting him on a chain like a dog. As a child, the girl's influence was like that of an empress. She and Lucas were married. But after the coup, her family and she turned their backs on him. The son of the man who staged the coup became the new ruler of the empire. But she and Gustav had no feelings for each other. She spent the night with him, and it was a most awful night herself and for all. She had never hoped for such a blessing. Brill prayed to God that her baby would receive the blessing of his way, for to her pregnancy was a symbol of hope, and 5 months later, already on the street people were discussing how the new empress is already pregnant and expecting a baby. News of the empress's pregnancy spread throughout the empire in Vienna. The people were rejoicing. Also, the servants thought they needed to revise the budget on the 20th when the empress inquired about the problem. Butler reported that the Rose Palace budget is depleted. It needs to be adjusted and money redirected from other buildings to fill. The Rose Palace is the home for the favorite girl most favored by the ruling emperor, the current occupant Eva. Eve has been dubbed the most beautiful flower of the empire, and she herself has an arrogant, extravagant personality. The emperor's love for Eva was growing by the day, and her insolent behavior became more and more hateful day by day. It was and is natural for her to take what belongs to the protagonist. So the girl wasn't going to change her mind. She didn't want to divert the budget. She realized that they had to think about the fact that she was about to have a baby. But the emperor and the servants, the nobles, are indifferent to this fact. She ordered one last servant out. After all, she wanted to be alone. Then the servant told the empress that the emperor had told her not to leave the pregnant empress alone. She realized that he had so many important matters of state on her shoulders, but the emperor hadn't even managed to carry her for 5 months and had ordered her to keep an eye on him. And besides, His Majesty the Emperor sent a letter. It said His Majesty was coming to tea, so we had to get ready. At the tea party itself, he was asked why he suddenly decided to visit them. Well, the guy said, that he just wanted to visit his pregnant wife. After all, people need to see that the emperor is paying attention to his wife. After every visit of the guy, terrible things were happening in her palace, and today Anonymous could not have been more nervous. Suddenly, he decided to give her a gift. It was the baby's first shoe. The guy also explained that he made them himself, and I think they would be just right for the baby. Well, the emperor wanted to be a good father. The girl herself realized he was never a good husband. But he said the nobility should come from him, not the empress. Just like they told the maid, the guy just needed time to realize he's a father now. Maybe their child would grow up surrounded by parents who loved each other. All of a sudden, it was all bloody. The girl didn't understand why she was bleeding. The main character couldn't breathe. She didn't want to die. Her baby. When she had already closed her eyes, the emperor himself said that Eva was very upset when she learnt that the main character was pregnant. She was the only obstacle in their way. And then the empress woke up in some wilderness. The girl woke up in her bed. She began to remember everything as it was. She was given poison tea that was from the emperor. After that, she died with her child. Council's memories began to nauseate abruptly, so she decided to find a suitable place. Well, when she walked past the mirror, she saw a strange face. After what she saw, she went straight to the street and realized she'd never been in this place. So I wondered where she was now. I mean, if it's just dirt and poor people. Well, the child who was the girl's only hope no longer existed. So she promised herself that she would drive a dagger right through the emperor's heart to give him back all the pain he had caused her. He would pay for the death of his child. She was ready to get revenge on him, that's for sure. But first she needed to know what had happened to her. The girl walked up to the two guys and asked where Diana was right now. She needed directions. How to get to the Emperor of the Imperial Palace. The guys immediately started reacting to the girl, wanted her on her arm to promise her that you would answer you palace. The protagonist knew full well when she was captured that there must be a reason why she was reborn, but she realized she couldn't just lose, so she bit the guy's arm to get free. After that, she ran straight out of the alley, pawning that she must hurry, for if she ran out into the big street, she could find help. Just then, she saw her way to the center of the square. One of the guys grabbed her by her clothes. The man had already called for his helpers because he was able to catch the girl, but the protagonist herself heard the sound of a carriage from the town square, so she realized that she had to hurry there as soon as possible. Brill again little to break free from the man's grasp and run out onto the main road. There was already a carriage rushing by, straight at the girl herself. She realized that this life must be different. This time she did her best. Her child, her thirst. When the young gentleman asked his driver what had happened, he told him that a girl had run out into the road, and there was an accident. It's also a young girl who fainted, and it seems someone was following her. So the young master ordered her into the carriage, because he wanted to take her to the estate with him. Brill woke up in bed in the morning. A bright light was shining and right in her eyes. The first thing the girl saw when she opened her eyes was the Baron. Why was the one from the first one surprised? Then the man told her she'd been hit by a carriage. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries, so he naturally wondered why she had done it. The girl remembered that he was the son of a former imperial physician. She had heard that after the coup, he had gone into hiding to follow Lucas. So after thinking about it all for a bit, she immediately realized what had ended up in Lucas's mansion. She realized it was Lucas who had been thrown under the carriage, but she realized she didn't need to panic. After all, this was the second chance the goddess had given her. A life for happiness for something that happened many years ago, because of the death of a child who died at the hands of his father. The doctor also noticed that the condition of the girl's body was not very good. After the meal and had to take the medicine, then say about the security to call the master. The girl asked the doctor to tell Lucas personally that the Golden Rose is here to greet the Black Wolf under the moon. Back in the early days, the protagonist and Sokka sat under a tree. Lucas wanted to create a side where people would live in peace. Of course, his mate was Julie, and her father wants that too. But the young boy doubted it was a good idea in time. It is just an ideal. Apparently many people support from his father thick they him, so he felt dark times ahead. So the girl promised herself she'd light the way alongside Lucas. That's why the boy wanted to call the girl a shining golden rose, and he'd be the Black Wolf, and he'd be the Ron Empire in vain. That was their first promise. When the doctor informed Lucas of this, he was of course first surprised. You didn't make promises to each other when you were kids. Their boyfriend's personal password. It was a secret, so he didn't know how the woman he met could find out later. He realized it couldn't be a mere coincidence. Perhaps she wanted to get close to him with malicious intent, so he had to check it out for himself into the real, true identity of the Golden Rose. The girl herself realized it was to take revenge on her ex. We need to get into the Imperial Palace, and to do that, you need to confirm your identity. One must scout the situation thoroughly to get close to him. Then the moment Lucas walked in and directly asked the girl who she was understandably terrified to face him. But if she stopped now, there was nothing she could do. Only the girl tried to explain that she was sent by the late Empress. Lucas couldn't help himself and started strangling the girl. Lucas thought the girl was lying. After all, the Empress was pregnant. He couldn't believe her words. Not even knowing who she was, he ordered her to get out of here and go back from where he came from. The main character had nothing to do with that body, and she has to take her place next to Lucas. To do that, she had to lie to him. She told the guy she was going to give him his crown back, so she asked him to marry her. Lucas was surprised. After all, the girl herself spoke beautifully. He wondered if the crown of the empire was so easy to get. He remembered that the child empress had a good mind. She must have known she was going to die soon and planned the whole thing. The girl herself didn't understand why he was angry. After all, he rarely didn't use his emotions. She had confronted him many times since her family's betrayal. They had turned their backs on each other, and that he had completely repressed his feelings and cut her out of his life. I mean, she did it to herself. He must hate her. If she says she'll help him get his crown back, he'll have no choice but to accept her hand. Lucas told me that he had no reason to avenge the death of his enemy. He would leave now to save his life. Olivia told Lucas that she knew where his sister Serena was. Princess Serena is Lucas's sister, kidnapped during the Revo Rota. Gusto used the prince's guards to turn this around and rein Lucas in. After entering the courtyard, she gathered all the information about the imperial family and learnt the location of the princess. It was a trap for Gusto. If she had to protect her child in a critical situation, she used this information properly. Lucas promised that if it turned out to be a lie, that the girl herself would kiss her life goodbye. She promised that if the young man agrees to the wedding, she will confirm her words. Although she doesn't want a lavish ceremony, she wants his love. He'll personally borrow himself and she'll get her revenge. It's just great to be able to harness the desire of each of them. She realized that it would be difficult if he dragged out the decision. She knew nothing of his funeral. But judging by the nature outside the window, not much time had passed since his death. So she assured him that he must hurry. After all, you can think of the weather. Bodies decompose very quickly in midsummer. After 3 days, Her Majesty's death will no longer be hidden. When it is announced, they will not be able to marry, for it will be necessary to pay homage to the deceased. If the princess is asked to go elsewhere, he will not be able to find out where she is. But the man just laughed and explained to her that if she married him, she'd have to do something else. Even if she has no feelings for him, she'll feel the pain on her wedding night. The girl hadn't thought about it but promised she'd do her best. Lucas called his assistants. It was to let them know he was getting married today. He needed to find a priest to perform the ceremony. Everyone around here is more in shock. They don't understand what's going on here. This whole major credit thing made me faint. Already that evening, Lucas had told his aides that there had not even been a single piece of news that Her Majesty was dead, not even from the mole planted in the imperial palace. If this information is true, then she really is the Empress's shadow. One had to be careful. It could be a trap. But that promise belonged to him and her alone. If this girl is not her shadow, then so be it. So Lucas ordered her assistant to find out information about it. They had to get ready for the wedding in a hurry. But in spite of this, the servants remarked how beautiful it was. The boys were already standing together in the church. They had to look back at the name of the goddess. Lucas was asked if he was ready to take Brella as his wife, and to love and protect her. He swore an oath. She was also asked if she was ready to take Lucas as her husband, and live with him for the rest of her life. She responded positively with a second wedding dress and a second ceremony, a marvelous image of her new life and new possibilities. And she's not about to waste that chance. They were asked to kiss. The groom thought they were risking their lives, so he warned the girl that she might change her mind about leaving after all. But she said that once she did, there was no turning back. Lucas took the girl in his arms and surmised that the newlyweds' first night would be a little tense. Already in the room, Lucas noticed that the girl was playing her part well. She replied that she had to look like she had married him with more love. Lucas decided to postpone the wedding night and come to the point of asking directly where his sister was, too. Olivia told me to find a 14-year-old boy named Noah, a mate at the Cartman orphanage. Lucas was surprised, for he had searched the whole empire to find her, and never would have thought that she lived in no way a girl. Lucas the butler came into the room. Lucas asked him what news he brought. After all, it is dangerous for the princess to come to the capital. Then Olivia surmised that the Empress was dead, and the Emperor's palace manager would be in complete disarray. Then the butler suggested canceling the trip. But Lucas didn't agree with him. The more he happens to take action, the more desirable the Emperor will be behind him. It could lead to rocal and unrest. So they should take advantage of this house. And there's a street festival coming up. When a man descends the wigs, he comes out to the largest grape in the empire. Lucas didn't know if the aristocrats would come there to enjoy the festival, but Olivia said they would, and asked why they shouldn't join the princess and enjoy the festival. Lucas realized that only then would Olivia be safe, so he'd send 2 knights to make sure they didn't suspect anything. Even the butler was surprised by this. After all, sending a shadow knight would jeopardize the safety of the Lord himself. Then Lucas replied that he was just starting the game. I don't need to remind you why he was sent here so far away. The sound of puppets, that sound of 12 bells ringing. In the Emperor's creation, it is the announcement of the death of the Empress. Lucas realized it was true after all. So he said he was sorry, but the first official act after the wedding would be to bury the empress. Olivia replied that it didn't matter. It's more like an opportunity. The girls also filed. It was her identity and needed to be looked at. She was the illegitimate child of a nobleman from the northern part of the empire, possibly with a dash of barbarian blood. A 20-year-old young lady wanting to bleat in the capital. Lucas stayed in the north for a while, turned in the story already with his fiancée. Olivia asked Lucas if the creatures were loyal, and where they are now. Lucas replied that they also died in the north, because of a savage raid. She remembered that so many deaths and didn't see it until I was in the wrong way. So she hoped that a peaceful and tranquil future awaited them. A doctor burst into the room and informed the young master that Leo had arrived at the imperial palace. It was much sooner than even the Onion himself had expected, so he asked his bride if she was ready. She answered positively she had memorized her new identity, so she wanted to go straight to the imperial palace. Lucas is informed that he has received a letter from His Majesty. He also orders him to appear urgently at the imperial palace. Before the knight wanted to leave, Lucas stopped him and asked him to tell the emperor that he was not alone now. He would have to tell him that 2 members of the Viterpen family would be attending the funeral. Olivia announced that she couldn't wear the dress. Of course, everyone knew she didn't like it, but it was her first night out. It was also the funeral of Her Majesty the Empress, and this dress was within the bounds of propriety. The maid couldn't take it, and said that the Duke should not be dishonored where all other people from other countries were gathered. But the girl replied that it's not clear who it's a funeral or a celebration for, so it could be the death of the Empress for someone else, and a chance to get what they've been chasing for so long. Nor can they cure tears with a contented emperor. It suggests that they are not going to mourn the death of the Empress. They won't announce a new family member together, so it's a great opportunity to get attention. If the maids understood her well, they should have new clothes. But let it be black, regardless of the design. And now Olivia was back here again. She never thought she'd be invited to her own funeral. Both horrified and amused her at the same time. Lucas didn't take his eyes off her. When she asked what was wrong, she said the clothes were great, and the girl herself is very beautiful. Olivia's been tweaking the emperor's goals. It's not a funeral, it's a huge celebration. Lucas himself has been invited to the party, so they must observe all the necessary formalities. It's obviously not his first time at the imperial palace. Perhaps, but no one will recognize her. Now she's only 20 years old. She's never been to the imperial palace. It's not the first time she's looked back. It was a very risky move. She's worried that she's caused Lucas more problems. She is very curious about what kind of life he has been living all this time. Before stepping out of the carriage, Lucas reminded her of their purpose. He'd given her more than just a name, and not to forget that her place was by his side. The butler immediately came to the Korean and informed her young duke that His Majesty was already waiting for him. Of course, Lucas was surprised, for they had not yet removed Her Majesty's tribute to the Empress. But the butler stood his ground. He said it was His Majesty's order. The living are more important than the dead. Now Olivia's by his side, and it's obvious to everyone that they're married. Lucas, he's always put up with these insults. It shows the level of imperial nobility, and the emperor himself just doesn't see it. They will be insulted often in the future, but it's not yet time to show their face. Like a shadow, one must lurk and wait, a chance to tear at His Majesty's throat. When the beasts opened, the first thing the emperor did was to greet his friend. Both bowed their heads and saluted His Majesty, reporting that they are near to see his son of empire. The emperor said he was very disappointed in Lucas. He sent him to save the empire from the barbarians, and he's having a love affair. It's very interesting what kind of woman would marry a man like that. And he wondered what kind of mood she was in. The emperor came close to the girl and told her to stop bowing, and she looked him straight in the face. It was funny to the emperor to watch this girl shiver in front of him, a curious and foolish girl. So he decided it was necessary to show her her place. He said she was the charming lady who managed to capture Lucas's attention, who sent away all the suitors for his heart. Now she understands why he did it. The emperor asked whether the girl had the blood of savages, for her hair color gave her away as a savage. But Lucas decided to grab the emperor's hand, and said it wasn't long before the confrontation with them began. The war is over. But if this was Lucas's way of showing his nobility, the emperor was ridiculous. That Lucas unites the emperor in touching him with a woman. Then he should be at the table showing him his place. Then the emperor reminded the duke that the search for his princess was still on. Olivia realized that those words were a provocation, Perhaps Lucas's behavior had caused the emperor to storm out on them. Holding the emperor just doesn't want to leave them alone. But when something like this happens, it's best not to be provoked lest you lose your fighting spirit. She's not going to call out her condition to him. It was fitting that he should be given that he didn't get to see his sister this time. And yes, if the emperor didn't express himself, he would like to bid Her Majesty farewell in person. The emperor realized that it was his turn to laugh at Lucas, because he couldn't even hit him. But he realized it was because of the girl. The emperor says it's time for him to go, for it is time to bid farewell to his patricians. Before the boys decided to leave, the emperor asked if the boys wanted to know how the empress died. Turns out his dear wise empress was having an affair. For even if one did not know with whom, it would be shameless. If their child had been born, the fate of the empire would not have been sealed. But the cameraman himself just said she was dead. The emperor's words were Olivier's way of telling Olivier that her Lucas was her replacement, and he was having an affair with the empress. But Olivia didn't mean it, and told her it was true. And such is the reality that the emperor himself has experienced a bittersweet, and a history that befits his title. So she said goodbye to him. The children were asked to be sure to say a prayer. Olivia wondered if there were a lot of people at the funeral. It could be awkward. But it was okay because she was prepared for it. There was no escaping death. Nearby, 3 girls were discussing the Duke's life, about how getting married was a really unexpected thing. Olivia realized that the gossip was everywhere, and people seemed to like it. There was a girl who wanted to meet Olivia. She needed to find her weakness, so she asked directly if Olivia had come to bid farewell to the dead empress. After all, the limits of such a long journey to see her. The woman had heard that Olivia was from the north. After all, how could the girl herself know from the traditions of the imperial palace Pahora? Olivia walked up to her already tombstone, a last greeting for a member of the imperial family, and she never thought she would have to do it for herself. She had to take the flower in one hand, then twist it to spread the fragrance by turning the stem at her feet and placing it against her body. At the end, to fold her hands and offer her condolences during the prayer. She apologized to herself for a lifetime of being used and then just thrown away. All around, people were amazed. After all, these are impeccable imperial manners, poor not incorrect details. She executed everything perfectly. The guard informed everyone present that they would now hold a farewell ceremony for the family members of the deceased empress. So he asked everyone to go to the cemetery. On the street, Lucas asked Olivia what happened. She said that I left him at the funeral parlor. So she said she'd be back in a minute, running back. She realized it was a mistake. She was distracted by the aristocrats' young wives and didn't say goodbye to the child. If she didn't, she'll regret it for the rest of her life. Already next to the coffin stood So and Father Thickly. Her father is Marcus Lorne, had great influence over the empire. The girl herself was raised only to benefit her family. According to the will of the head of the house, she was sold to the imperial family and married Thickly. I found myself entangled in a tangle of the rough branches of imperial palace life. And her father knew very well how she lived there. He never once said a word of comfort. Gusto told his father he could talk freely. Originally, as he said, he wanted to kill the empress next year. But no matter how much she whined for Eva, losing her was a tragedy for them all. Since she was pregnant, he decided to take her out now. Olivia realized it was all bullshit. Her father facilitated the murder. She couldn't understand her own daughter's reasons. Father said he would obey any decision the emperor made, and that decision came from him. The boy himself has noticed he knows how fathers read speech, so he'll have to make a toast when they drink to it. Olivia was shocked that a father was involved in his daughter's death. He sold her out for the family's well-being and condemned her to death. Perhaps it was to be expected. He cared more about the empress than Olivia. She worked so hard to be recognized. My whole body trembles from that vile betrayal. One moment they heard a foreign sound. It was Olivia. The emperor decided to go and see for himself. Well, suddenly the girl herself was grabbed and dragged. Lucas didn't know what had happened, but they had to get out of here. He informed her that if she left now, she would be under suspicion. He would take her in his arms and tell her to watch her tongue. On the street, Lucas asked his fiancée what had happened. She said she was sorry and also asked why he had followed her. He replied that newlyweds shouldn't lose their minds at events. Besides, it was the first time she'd ever been so brave to be embarrassed or scared. The Marquis was there and it was thick. It could have ended badly. If she didn't want to tell him what was going on, he wouldn't pry. Suddenly, the girl's father came up to the guys. He told Lucas that it had been a long time since the last time they had met. It wasn't the time for formal greetings, so they would do it next time. Olivia informed her father that there were bad rumors about Her Majesty, but she stood her ground, and that's why Olivia's so happy about it. The man apologized, bad behavior by his daughter, which made the Duchess feel uncomfortable. Lucas himself didn't realize what was going on here. He didn't even realize what he'd just seen. And if Olivia wanted to cry, she shouldn't be embarrassed. After all, today was still a very strange and sad day. Today was the funeral of Empress Olivia Tower for members of the imperial family lasted a week. But in Olivia's case, it was reduced to 3 days. That's how it ended. Whether it was from shock or from lack of rest since her return, but she had been sick or in bed these 3 days. She had a high fever, everything blazing in front of her eyes. Then a few days later, a letter came for her. This time it was in an invitation. The seal was a familiar letter to her from the imperial palace. The sender is Eva. The butler saw how Olivia wasn't even surprised that Eva had written to her. But that's what Olivia had hoped for. I was expecting to hear news of a new empress being proclaimed. It turns out the enemy is higher than it appears, even though she doesn't have a proper status yet, only the noble castle of Cousteau. However, she uses the seal of the imperial palace. That means she's doing quite well. The butler asked if the girl would like to update her wardrobe for such an occasion. As far as he was concerned, many married women favored Mrs. Blanc's dresses. After all, she is now a famous and promising designer. Even though Olivier herself has prepared things by you, it's still not enough. She realized it was a fact. After all, she had married a duke without any dowry to speak of. Olivia decided to ask the butler for a letter from her. Later, Olivia walked into her husband's office. He was just about to talk to him. He asked her how she was feeling. Defense was freaking out. Apparently, the one who hadn't been feeling well for a few days had gone into overdrive. The girl said she's back to normal now. She's feeling fine. Lucas said that someone had already been introduced to his sister. Even Olivier was surprised, for she had never imagined such a thing. Her Majesty the Empress had learnt of the princess's whereabouts shortly before her death. If it hadn't been for her carelessness, maybe they would have found her sooner. But because of her, Lucas is in trouble again. The whole thing even made Olivia bite her lip, which Lucas noticed and stopped her, noting that it wasn't her fault or her lips. Vinnick doesn't know what the Emperor himself is thinking. Thanks to the girl, he knows his sister's whereabouts. He's very grateful for that. Lucas turned to his fiancée. You're most likely aware that his family are known as dogs on a leash. But with Brielle, it's different. She didn't time that last name for nothing. She chose to be by his side. Because if she's sad, they'll have a problem. In any case, he thought, they should observe the situation and adjust their plans. That's what he was trying to say. And just as the girl's feelings for the late Empress and sincere it was noticeable personality, of course, still also expresses suspicion. But in general, he Vitya to that. That she, as well as his wife, could be sent as much money as she needed. After all, she had come to him for that. Olivia was surprised she was starting to trust her. Then Lucas joked that they should build an estate to match the ladies. Olivia took her husband's hand and touched her head. For not a couple of winters later, His Highness will step into his shoes. For she truly wanted to help him. She had wanted it from the beginning. It was just because of her faith in her that she realized it better. It was time to part with the shadow of the buried Olivia. The Emperor and Eve and the Marquis have made their move, so it's her turn. Slowly making her way forward. Lucas realized it was a side after all. Even though he met her in the pipes, there's a sense of nobility in her every move, as if she'd come from a good upbringing. And her habits and her smile reminded him of someone who rejected him. He didn't fully understand who she really was. More like Mrs. Blanc's shop. And a letter came. She asked who it was from, and she said it was from the Vitapan estate. She was surprised that the Duchess from whom everyone speaks had written her a letter. The woman didn't fully know how she was going to do. The status wasn't one to ignore. So the woman realized that this girl was a redneck. So she had to get the message across that she was on top. So she decided to answer later. When Olivia asked the butler if the letter from Blanc had arrived, he unfortunately answered tzatziki. Olivia realized she had to make the first move. So she ordered the butler to tell the Blanc that she was coming herself, to the shop. There she would show who was more important. Blanc asked what all the fuss was about. She got a new letter from the estate. They say they're coming today. The woman knew that if word got out that the Duchess had personally come to see the commoner, Her reputation would be ruined. She didn't expect her to come herself. So she ordered him to leave immediately, but he reported that the Duchess had a dinner on the way to them. The women greeted the Duke. The woman was preparing in a hurry, having organized a tea party during the night, so she asked the Duke to sit down. Olivia said that her emails went unanswered, so she decided to come in person because of her worries about the woman's well-being. The woman thanked Olivier for his concern. Illness forces you to take temporary holidays. Olivia asked the woman to keep her tricks to herself and not to try to fool her. Blanc is surprised. After all, Olivier herself has redneck blood in her. She is rumored to be a shy and weak character woman. The woman herself asked Olivier why she complained here, and came so suddenly and so rudely. Then Livia informed him that she did not consider it so. After all, whoever ignored a letter to the Duchess has the right to say so. There's only one reason why she might need the shop. If she sold ordinary clothes, there would be no reason to come. And she speaks of the edge and elegance of mistress's clothes. Her outfits have the power to make a person stand out from the crowd, and no matter what the season. And their value can be measured in money, so Olivia thinks she doesn't need them. Mrs. Blanc's clothes represent stateliness, money, and power. Olivia asked what's wrong with those clients who have a lot of clout. After all, they hadn't stopped her redneck from calling her personally. The woman herself started 10 years all the fortune she got by her own labor. Many aristocrats attend balls in her clothes, but she herself has never been there. Baby, they're two different levels. That's what status is. No matter how many auctions are not held, for what high price would not sell clothes noblewoman will still not become. Therefore, Olivia's her power. She'll help her get her place back. According to imperial information, Mrs. Blanc's father was a pure-blooded Vaudevarin, so he had to marry a noblewoman befitting his status. Mrs. Blanc's mother, a commoner, had only to leave with her child. Mistress hid that she was a bastard child of the cordon, so as a mother she lived without status. But the woman herself did not let on and said that she did not realize how Olivia had found out, but that the place was only half hers. Well, she's not actually small enough to take it, even if the North gets him back now. Well, the woman agreed to the deal after all, and asked what she had to do to make it happen. The day of the tea party and the palace came. Olivia got out of her carriage and was helped to do so by the butler. She walked over to the table where the other women were already seated. Ava Lawrence was sitting there, but they were all together pretending like there was no Olivier around. Then Olivia decided to play a game. She decided to leave. But when Eve asked where Olivia was going, she said she was going back. There's no one here who can use the imperial seal. Noah asked Lucas what he himself was going to do to Mistress, for he himself knew that he had been assured by the other until his death, but was now in another marriage with Mistress. Therefore, he must behave with her in a special way, since he had never been interested in women before. After all, he was worried about how the Duke himself would behave after the wedding, but as he thought, he hasn't changed at all. Lucas wanted to put it succinctly and clearly. Even with all his desire, he wouldn't be able to let a friend take an interest in a woman. Noah realized that the Duke was trying to justify himself. In any case, he must now take responsibility for his mistress. Her name is on everyone's lips now, so even the slightest misstep would be enough to put her in jeopardy. Events are again brought to the protagonist, who has informed those around her that she is to have a meeting with the master of this seal. If Her Majesty the Empress is absent, then the Emperor has invited her. It was beautifully splendid. When it became known that Ava had used the seal of the imperial family, she would be singled out for ridicule. The Emperor showed up and apologized to Olivia for keeping her waiting because he'd invited her. The Emperor told me that he had business to attend to, so he asked Eve to prepare for their visit. Olivia explained that everyone was actually pretending she wasn't there, even though she was standing right next to her. That's why she thought she was in the wrong place. When everyone was seated at the same table, the Emperor began the conversation that everyone knows that Hertz has recently married. Therefore, I think that today's meeting is dedicated to the Duchess. Olivia didn't know that His Majesty had personally taken part in organizing the reception, but the Emperor replied that it was his duty to look after his subjects. However, even he was not prepared for the Duke's marriage so suddenly. The Emperor of Nizam noticed at the funeral because he was too angry, and now he sees. He reported as having heard that the Duchess had come to them from the north, but she seemed familiar with court etiquette. Livia replied that it was all due to the Duke's instruction. The emperor thought Lucas was only interested in fighting and killing, but it turns out he cares about his wife. Then Eve began the dialogue as well, having noticed that it is obvious that His Majesty is not interested in Olivier's fictions and some their feelings of the Duke. After all, usually Hertz groups with everyone. Sometimes you his presence kind of cold. Olivia realized that it was hypocritical of being a saint, but she wasn't compelled to spread filthy gossip. She was uncomfortable with their words, so it was necessary to change the subject. Olivia decided to wear her gloves, and then immediately all the girls noticed it, emphasizing that they looked elegant and luxurious. None of them had ever seen anything like it. Olivia has noticed that all of Madame Blago's clothes look amazing. Recently out of contract, she's now her personal designer. The girls were surprised at the bitch, for they were the first to hear such a thing. Even Eva herself noted that the Empire had never had noble ladies who had their own personal designer. Livia's not greedy. She just doesn't want to wear the same clothes as everyone else. By the way, if they want to show respect to a person, they should be careful what they say and to whom they say it, because it is just politeness. She did her best to please each and every one of them. That's the kind of thing that made Eve angry. She realized that Olivia now wanted to hint at her status. Eve remembered that only the Empress had the courage to call her that. Even the Emperor noticed that it was an unusual point because the girl was from the north. Well used to socializing with the noble houses, it would be best not to interfere. The Emperor has informed them that he will be the first to leave. He is afraid, but if he does not leave now, his advisor will personally strangle him. Ava walked up to the Emperor. They embraced together. Olivia certainly hadn't expected this, and it seemed Olivia the Wasp had been unnecessary from the start. Now she understood how the Emperor behaved when she wasn't at home or around. Well, suddenly Duke Lucas himself is here. The first thing he did was to summon the Emperor himself. The Emperor also wondered what Lucas was doing here, and if he was going to have tea with the ladies. But he said he had just come to fetch his wife. He was worried that she hadn't quite settled into the imperial palace yet. This infuriated the Emperor. He laughed and did not show it. I realized the unfounded excitement inherent in newlyweds, and it seems their affection for each other trumps respect for the Emperor. Lucas decided to tease him, and asked him if the Emperor himself was jealous of them. Olivia didn't fully understand why Lucas was here. His presence wasn't part of her plans, but she's glad he came. The Emperor didn't fully understand what was going on here. The shift says they're jealous of him. He seems to have changed a lot since the wedding. His behavior has become less predictable. But the Emperor realized it was more than that. After the funeral, he should have gone straight to his younger sister. But he didn't. Nor did he leave, even when he insulted his late wife. Therefore, the Emperor did not understand what was going on here and why this was the case. The Emperor only threw back his hand and laughed, that the Duke had changed so much that one does not get asses of the sincerity of their feelings for their wife. The Emperor wondered if the Duke was worried that the Emperor might harm his wife. Olivia remembered that it was the Emperor of this man who killed her with his own hands, and dares to say such a thing. Lucas, of course, was furious, but he didn't show it and asked if His Majesty could do such a despicable thing. Lucas wondered what the Emperor would be able to piss off. He was going to resist his provocations. But looking at Olivier, she happened to remember the last one in Vienna before he died, and it made her break down badly. Lucas looked at the whole picture and decided to give her his cloak. The letter made it seem like she was freezing. The girls who stood nearby were surprised that the rumors were true after all, and that Hertz Lubika was to be his wife. It was the first time they had seen him behaving so romantically. Lucas decided to leave, because it looks like his wife is not feeling well today. Even the Emperor noticed that he was also about to leave, so it was very timely, by the way. The Emperor was only looking at Lucas, and he was already pissed off. He was annoying him. Before you had your Olivier, I looked at the girls, and I realized that their upbringing only wanted the best for them, but they had to leave too. Well, one of the girls before Olivia decided to leave approached her and asked her if she would mind joining them at the next tea party, because the woman would like to get to know Olivia better. Olivia recognized the girl. It was the Duchess of Terran, and her family owned lands in the east and kept neutral, so Olivia saw no reason to refuse. She agreed gladly and accepted her invitation. Terran said that she had not had a chance to introduce herself earlier, but it seemed that Olivier already knew about her. The girl herself replied that she remembered all the names of the nobles and that remembering them was the first thing she had been taught in her etiquette lessons. Taryn realized that the rumor could not be trusted. She could not believe in her head that the Duchess was so elegant and noble. After all, Ava herself is used to manipulating rumors in society for her own interests. But now she is not the only one who can do so Olivier may need to be on her guard. And everything went according to plan, so thought Olivier attending this tea party was a good idea, even though it's bad form to decline an invitation from the Imperial Palace. She had no reason to come here without any benefit, and this tea party gave her the opportunity to achieve two goals at once. Firstly, to gain the favor of one of the guests to get rid of the foul rumors. And secondly, Olivia walked up to Countess Lawrence after those words. Olivia recalled seeing the Countess at the funeral. It was a lot of people. Olivia said she wanted to get to know this girl better, and offered her tea at the Duke's manor. She hadn't had the opportunity to meet other noblewomen since she'd moved here. Of course, the Countess herself would be delighted to be invited, but Lady Ava will be furious if she finds out. The point is to be careful. So, the girl replied that she was glad to be invited, but she is afraid that recently her schedule has not become free windows at all, so the meeting will have to be postponed for later. Then Olivia said she'd have to get the Countess to accept the invitation. After all, no one wants me to know her secret. The Countess wondered how Olivia knew about this language. Already inside the Imperial Palace, the Emperor was raging. Eve turned to him, of course, but he also asked to be escorted out of here. He didn't understand why things went the way they did. After the noisy Empress Olivia had been removed, the Marquis had also become docile. So he thought all the annoying flies were gone, but Lucas remained. He did not know what his intentions were, but he could not allow him to fulfill them, and so it was necessary to destroy him, as soon as possible. The Emperor has summoned his Earl Scoff. In order to inform him that the Duke must be sent on his march, a letter to the Duchess must be prepared. The Emperor realized that if need be, he could execute the Duke, just as his father had beheaded Lucas's father. A few days later, Duke Olivia was informed that the Countess had arrived. In the very corridor, Olivia met her fiancé, so she asked him what he was doing here. Lucas wanted to see his wife off. After all, it is natural to want to be together with your waifu anytime. Olivia knew it was tricky. After all, he didn't trust her completely either. They were already walking together. Olivia saw that there seemed to be new servants, and of course there was interest in why, but there seemed to be a special reason to be happy. He asked her if she had heard of the new people hired for the mansion. There might be spies among them, so he decided to show them their close relationship. Other people's prying ears are everywhere. So Lucas held out his hand to her, and together they went to hold on to it. Olivier immediately noticed that he seemed to have experience. Maybe he had been in a lot of relationships. Then Lucas said that if they did everything the right way, he would cheat on them. Olivia, during the wedding, and the tea party was pretty brave. As time passes, it becomes difficult to play her part as easily as she did then, and because they've grown closer, now the pretense is laced with her own feelings. Or maybe it's the guilt she's feeling. Lucas cares enough about her as his wife to spend time with the one who once betrayed her. It's unconscionable of her. But cast those thoughts far away. After all, they both merely have to fulfill their roles for a common goal. There should be no doubt she will do her best. She must artificially deceive people. On the way out, we almost made it. But I asked Olivier last, about that moment when they were at the tea party. Lucas had chosen his role perfectly, so she wondered what his way of doing it was. And of course he thought about it. And he said he'd like to tell you, but unfortunately they're here now. He would report back when they were all done. He would drive her to the wall and inform her that before they started, she needed to stop addressing him as Your Highness. She can't know if his circle isn't around someone else. If it's heard by the spies, it will definitely report to the Emperor. Olivia came up to the Countess. They greeted each other and decided to move on to tea. But before that, they had to take a walk in the glass greenhouse, because it was insanely beautiful. The Countess during the walk didn't know how best to start the conversation. At one point, Olivia stopped in front of one flower and remarked that it was the most beautiful. The Countess immediately recognized this flower and was very surprised because it was said to be from the Kali kingdom. It is not very beautiful, but it is gradually spreading in the wrong empire. Olivia spoke in another language, saying some words that if the time they had been waiting for finally came, they would believe it. The Countess was surprised, for it was a perfect language. When the Countess asked Olivia if she was a potassium, Olivia said that if she was a potassium, but she had to get on her knees, in front of the princess, the kingdom of Calicide, the vanished of the Ron Empire, and the true personal Countess Laurent. The report for thickly stated that she was beheaded and hung on the castle wall, but in reality she barely escaped before the kingdom was captured. The last princess, the only heir. Because she was loved and cherished in the kingdom, her escape was kept secret and not many people knew about it. She has lived a peaceful and quiet life ever since. The Countess was very curious as to how Olivia knew this information. After all, she wasn't from the Queen. Of course, Olivia replied that she didn't know how the Countess could have lived so long in peace. She had not the rudiments of wit and intelligence. But Olivia wanted to say that their meeting was very significant, as it was something her people had been waiting for a long time. Olivia wanted to communicate that they both had something in common. But Graphia laughed only because she should not be underestimated, for she cannot be caught in a net, only with sweet speeches. Olivia, I realized that the Countess had decided to show all her feelings, usually the reaction of a victim who has been cornered, but Olivia knew what the Countess was capable of. Well, then Olivia threatened that as long as the Countess was useful. But if she just disappeared, Olivia would get rid of her just like Eve. She can tell us everything about her personality. I mean, it'll be nice to see her legend dispelled. The Countess realized that then all her efforts would be for naught, and her hopes of success would crumble like a house of cards. All she wanted was to avenge her kingdom, which the Empire had destroyed, so she kept her identity hidden. And in the past, she married an old count just to please Eve, but she was never able to gather useful information in the Empire, since she couldn't find out anything. Empress Olivia had deftly handled all the details that one couldn't even pick on, and Eva only thought of bathing in wealth and luxury, and drinking the interior against the late Empress was another reason why the Countess could not learn anything from the oversight presented to her. She had to hide and hide and hide. All that was left was to grit her teeth and wait to dream of a place for the kingdom, until the day of reckoning came. So Olivia asked the Countess how long she was going to follow foolish advice. After all, she had learnt nothing about affairs of state. So Olivia asked her to take her side, and in return she would supply the Countess with information. The clock is ticking. It's time for her to get her head round it, to take matters into her own hands and organize what she has long sought to do. After all, she has an example of someone who has taken matters into his own hands and achieved everything he wants. Because it wasn't a favor, it was a forced contract to cooperate. Olivia just threatened her. But the Countess said she needed time to think about it, to see if Olivia could really help. Olivia replied that she understood that the Countess needed time to think, but there are a lot of lives at stake, so Olivia asked to consider the fact that she didn't have a lot of time to wait. Granny trailed off. Olivia sighed she wasn't used to this, to threaten a man and at his difficult circumstances, but only this method was more fictitious and workable. But the Countess had correctly made it clear that intimidating with information was not the correct step to take in order to gain the trust of the person you wanted to bring to your side. Already in the garden, Olivia heard Noah looking for the kitten, and at one point, Lucas was still able to catch the cat with his hands. Seeing this whole picture, Olivier immediately remembered his childhood. After all, Lucas had never passed by wounded animals. But she wondered why he was still helping them. It's very strange to watch the carefree Lucas. In the palace, when they just crossed glances, it created a lot of gossip among people. At Vidi Olivier's, Lucas approached her and decided to introduce her to the cat because he looked just like her. The cat ran out of Lucas's arms and jumped on Olivia. With that, she lost her balance and started to fall, but the bow with the bow caught her. A new one came in who was all tapa, and asked the guys what they were doing here. Lucas explained that they were just talking. Lucas pointed out that there was no need to be shy. It's normal behavior among normal couples, and they're newlyweds, and they need practice, but he was talking about dating. Lucas reminded me of what Olivia asked, what's the best way to play the part well? And he answered that Noah and just gave a good idea, practice. The butler came to Lucas. He brought a letter from the imperial palace. It was an invitation for Olivia, in honor of the start of the war from the emperor. It was personally signed. After all, the order was given a few days ago to depart with the capital, the goal of destroying the rebels. And then Lucas sees a new war the day she was invited to the event. It's an order from the emperor. Lucas promised that the mansion would be looked after so there wouldn't be any problems. And anyway, Olivia didn't understand why she'd been invited, but she couldn't make plans for the future because of it. Then, well, once again, I remembered that this is a childhood occasion where they can go on a date now, and they should hurry. Already inside the carriage, Olivia realized that time was flying very fast. Autumn is one of the most beautiful times of the year, and Lucas sat and worked even while traveling. He had really grown up, she realized now. In the past, they had been the same height, but now he was a broad-shouldered, tall young man. He was no longer the little boy she knew. Lucas decided to tell Olivia that she planned to won the Emperor and hurt his army, but he still needs to deal with the rash of stations, which is why he needs Olivia's advice. After all, the Emperor is not a stupid man. He can recognize the ruse, and if he gets caught, only his soldiers. And he also doesn't want to sacrifice his wars, and that's why he's willing to protect the men who are loyal to them. Olivia suggested burying them in the ground. If you throw a corpse in the water, it will float. If you throw it in a fire, it will leave traces. She buried them in its place, digging a deep grave so no one could find them. So their warriors can wait outside the capital and come in the rear, to the enemy disguise the spot of ordinary people, because the Emperor's men are their enemies, and Lucas can be executed at any time he wants to go to meet them with open arms. He answered in the negative. He thought about it too. But there is one, but more quarrels should be behind the Emperor's orders as he has no choice. So he thinks that this way is very cruel. Olivia understood what it meant to have that opinion. When she'd been Empress, she hadn't given it much thought. It would be wonderful if there was a way to save and turn out from the bloodshed. Protect his men and ensure the victory of this one option. Lucas thanked Olivier for his advice. He had been able to make the right decision. They've arrived. All the people were looking at the Duke, who the newsman had already married. This little girl was selling flowers, and Lucas saw it and he went up to her. And he asked her how much the flowers cost. The girl replied that the bouquet cost 1 livre. Lucas told the girl that it was not like the business she helped to sell more at the specialized place, but the girl replied that to sell trades at another place, you have to pay a lot of taxes for places. Lucas bought all the flowers, and asked Olivier if she didn't like the flowers. They're not pretty to you. Then Olivia said they were her favorite flowers. So Lucas suggested that Olivier enjoy the day. More specifically, a date, she responded with pleasure. Probably the money that Lucas paid will run out, and this girl will continue to sell on the street. But this day became the best. Her memory will reflect happy memories, and in the future this episode will give strength to acquire and overcome all the difficulties of life. Even though Lucas is a grown-up, but he acted like a child in that moment. He's a ruler who chose people he could trust with his life. And, for the sake of survival in the Turno-bush of the imperial family, she chose a different path, and avoided people for fear of betrayal. And when she realized she was wrong, she was ashamed and envious. She was the Empress. Just what she'd worked hard for. By the beach, the guy strolled Olivier on reminded Lucas that he such did not tell the way and did not teach her how to do a good double play. Lucas apologized in advance. I mean, Olivia probably expected to hear that genius, but in reality, it's simple. If the expression being deceived by yourself is the worst, because in that case, the deceiver is constantly present when being deceived. In the past, he's experienced love with a lady. This story ended tragically. He was in love for a long time, though he doesn't remember much from the past. But his feelings are also fresh, some yes. So when he pretends, he starts thinking about that feeling of being in love, playing out the emotions he's feeling at the time. Because I pretend he's thinking about his feelings and emotions that he's experienced in the past. Olivia realized that Lucas had loved once after all. He asked her why she hadn't said anything. Did his words sound so stupid? After all, it wasn't even a stretch to think that he was trying to compare her to the image he'd conjured up in his head. He's remembering the past, and so he said everything he wanted to say. His feelings and his pretense time is over. If constantly thinking about how he would have acted in a situation is stupid because he should have acted. Lucas asked if Olivier hadn't had the same feelings, but she said that even if she had that experience, she had no right to think about those feelings. Lucas didn't think it was a crime. Olivia revealed that she has committed many sins in the past, as well as sacrificed and betrayed many people close to her. Well, since the girl herself never talked about the past, Lucas had no way of knowing how she felt. And maybe they should have listened to the others, so they wouldn't have a guilty conscience. Asked and wondered if she thought the man she loved could forgive her. Lucas thinks she's never heard those words, but only she can get rid of the guilt, and maybe no one has ever said those words to her, which means she's got a chance to let go of the guilt. So no advice to berate herself, for she did not deserve it. He told her earlier that she's a duchess now, and this family needs her. As Olivia listened to him, her heart pounded in her chest. There was one question on her tongue. If she told him she was really the Empress and also apologized, would he be able to say the same words? His warm words helped loosen the echoes of her heart, but she didn't have the courage to apologize for her past. She decided that when it was over, doing so would be the right thing to do. It was on their way back when they returned. The butler met his young master. The butler also informed the Duke that the Count was expecting him. The Count greeted Lucas. The Count is the guardian of the west of the Empire. In the eyes of the public, he demonstrated absolute loyalty to the Emperor in thick, thus becoming the leader of the Western lands. When Olivia Empress, she much to achieve his arrival, he did not show his nose in the palace. But at Lucas's call, he immediately arrived in the capital. Lucas also decided to get to know his wife and the Count. The Count said that getting to know the Duchess was a big part of it for him, and the Count was surprised to hear that Lucas was married. Lucas explained that the Count would look after the mansion while he was away. He's in the capital of mystery, arriving ahead of schedule. Already in private, the Count asked Lucas, did he have a relationship or a marriage, or perhaps he had acquired a faithful sister? Because to be honest, the Count didn't trust her, because she's a shadow of the Empress. Lucas said he hasn't figured out if he can trust her yet. He remembered that according to the data he'd gathered, she looked a lot like Olivia, so he could see that there was no lie in her actions. He knows Olivia intimately, so he can judge her actions from the outside. She's not worth the Earl's worry, and Lucas gathers more information about her. That the Empress might have changed a lot since she lived next to the Emperor, though she was a marquess in the past, but the interior was not visible behind her. Perhaps the Count was misled by Olivia's quiet demeanor, and the Imperial Palace is not the best place to display her character. Lucas realized that he would let time pass. He'd give his wife a chance to prove her loyalty. After all, he assumed they wouldn't have to wait long. Due to a planned event in Lucas's life, the people on the estate were busy with business. Threats and variables arising during the reunions persisted until she left. Anxiety was building up. She thought quite a bit as she slept peacefully. Was tasked with putting down a rebellion. That supposedly threatened the Empire. There was no occasion, no general assumption of honor. Time flew by quickly, and it was Lucas's departure date. When Lucas was about to leave, he asked her if he was going to say goodbye to his wife, but Lucas was well aware that his girlfriend was already tired. He didn't want to wake her up this morning so that she wouldn't be too tired. But Livia herself was in a hurry to meet Lucas. After all, he'd decided to leave ahead of schedule and didn't even want to say goodbye. She couldn't let him go without saying goodbye. I mean, she didn't think she'd do that. She went outside and called Lucas. She also expressed her incomprehension because he wanted to leave without saying a word. Lucas explained that he thought she had given him more than enough greetings today. Lastly, Alibi wanted to give away her gift. Of course, she realized she might not be lacking in skill, but she wanted to give him a handkerchief. Since Olivia had little time left, she needed to prepare for her trip to the Imperial Palace. After a while, Imperial Palace, it was announced that the Duchess had arrived. Inside sat the Emperor himself and Eve. Olivia felt it immediately, how she wasn't even being paid attention to, like she was nothing and really no development. The Emperor to the Duchess groping his mistress. This was frivolous behavior. In front of other aristocrats, he behaved the same way. It's like directly saying how much he despises Duke Lucas. Insulting and provocative. Olivia doesn't fall for that kind of thing. It's better to look at it as an opportunity to relive their parkings. Olivia started with a question when she interrupted the Emperor. Did you ask him directly why he'd invited her here? The Emperor said he called Olivia because of the upcoming goddess festival. And also to them, the Emperor began to tell them that as everyone knows, the Empresses were not true to him. That's why this time before the festival in the Butkov's imperial family. Ava has so far found it difficult to prepare for the festival alone, so he wants Olivia to help her. Olivia realized that she wouldn't be given control of the festival, but would just have to help Eve. Olivia realized that she would be given control of the festival and would have to help Eva. She planned to enjoy the festival in Bordeaux to meet Princess Siren. This may be the first opportune moment to prove her abilities as well. We have to say no somehow, so she said that I don't think she can help much. After all, this will be her first time attending the goddess festival in the capital. She's been trained, but she's only given a general idea. Ava also turned to her boyfriend. Didn't tell her that she could eat Countess Lawrence herself, and the others are also willing to help. So there's no need for her to help the Duchess. With one look, the Emperor made it clear to Eve that she wouldn't even resist. Then, the Emperor touched Yuli and reminded her that then at the last tea party she had failed to complete everything properly, muttering something about forgetting the imperial family. At her mercy, he could not stay away. He gave her an opportunity and she disappointed him, and she's going to dishonor him again by ruining the goddess festival. Pretending to be kind, he intimidates her with that look. She'd like to see him try to fool herself with that kindly look, but it was all making her feel worse. A maid came to bring tea, for the Emperor himself had carefully prepared for the Duchess's arrival. When the tea was poured, Olivia immediately recognized this cup. It's the same one that was used when she was killed. It was very similar, and even the maid brought the tea. The same usual rich tea flavor, the same Bisto pretending to be kind and actually being cruel. A lot of things are similar to that time, so feelings start to surface that you don't want to remember. Plus those memories of increasing anxiety and making everything more complicated, as if intimidating the thoughts in her head. This tea, she didn't know if it would be okay if she drank it as well. Maybe the dense one thinks her body is a nuisance and will try to poison her like that time. The operator asked at one point why the Duchess was not drinking tea. He asked her to taste the tea because he hoped that she would think carefully about drinking the tea, and then they would talk it over. The Emperor and also his stood up to see what had happened to the Duchess, for she had all risen. The sudden feeling of déjà vu was a jolt to her, making her remember that very moment, how she gradually began to see everything in red, how she'd caught her breath as her baby died before he was even born. Her breathing stopped intermittently, and she starts to faint. It's like she drank poisoned tea. But if she can't overcome this memory now, she didn't know what the future would hold since she had declared that she would make Lucas emperor. But if she can't even take care of herself, what can she accomplish in the future? She didn't know if she'd ever be able to see her alone again. She had to pull herself together. After all, she had to endure it just by gritting her teeth. She thanked the Emperor for his favor, but unfortunately she feared she must refuse his majesty. She didn't feel well at all. She must have been more nervous than she realized. And to meet such a great man as he. At the Emperor, hearing these words of the Pole, laughed, for Livia herself had won very collectedly. To make it true, her eyes and speech were not an ounce of regret. While looking at her condition, the Emperor realized that the girl wasn't lying after all. After all, she actually pretended to be calm, but she was concerned. The Emperor thought she was just a stubborn woman. Even Eva emphasized that the Emperor was fixated on this girl, not even though she was by his side. So Eva decided to leave the guys, saying she called her designer to make a new dress. She had to go to a meeting. The Emperor suggested that Olivier rest here tonight and return home tomorrow. After all, what would one think of him if he dishonored the Duchess by leaving when she was unwell? Of course she appreciated his offer, but she really needed to get back right now. She needed time to discuss this with the Duke. With one look, the Emperor made it clear that he could not be refused, so Olivia agreed to do him a favor. But if she makes a mistake, she's not only letting down the Lucas house, she's letting down the Emperor himself. So I just think it's something she needs to think about carefully. The Emperor was disgusted when she answered him with her smug face that he even wanted to crush her. But that feeling went away as soon as he saw her shivering. But for her now, trying to slip again as he wanted to break her leg so she couldn't leave him. But the Emperor has agreed. If she insisted on returning, despite her condition, he felt he should let her go. But the Emperor realized that Lucas was a lucky man. With a genius duchess like her protecting his estate, he had nothing to worry about, even if he died in battle. Lucas's aide is surprised that the soldiers started pitching tents in the woods during the storm, because they're probably gonna die. After all, it seems to have densely sent people who didn't even show up for basic training. Lucas realized she could bury them like Olivia suggested. The rain would soften the ground, which was perfect for their plan. It would go the way they expected, but for some reason he didn't feel comfortable. Olivier's heart pounded harder. She realized that the Emperor was stating the obvious. Otherwise, why would she have all the hesitation of going so far with the Duke? She left her family all at his mercy. That's why she believes he'll return safely. Of course she managed to answer him somehow, but she can't grow shaky. She can't take it much longer. So she had to put an end to this stifling conversation he was having. Go back home. At the Emperor, a friend took off his cloak and threw it over the girl herself, for she looked frozen. And her favorite duke was not there to give her his cloak, too. Before the Emperor left, he informed her that she could come back as she was not feeling well. He would send her another appendix later. Then she'll give him back his cape. Olivia didn't realize what kind of game he was playing. After all, he'd put a gold-embroidered cape on her, the symbol of the imperial family. Not an empress or a concubine, just a duchess. The Emperor came into Olivier's office. He did not know why he had come here. Perhaps it was because the manner of her answers reminded him of the Empress. Or maybe it was the eyes he had known for a long time. He realized she was a fascinating woman, and he wondered how she'd get out of the net he'd set for her, and what new things she would show him. The Marquis entered the room. The Emperor asked how the Duke was doing, replied that the camping was temporarily suspended due to a sudden thunderstorm. If he's not mistaken, they haven't camped in the nearest forest. The Emperor realized the need for maximum delay, so he ordered that the Duke be detained there. A knight ran up to Lucas. He reported that some of the Imperial knights had a stomach bug because of the prophet. Well, one aide had eaten the same meal, but nothing happened to him. Lucas began to suspect something wrong, when the rain stopped and it was only a long way to town. And that's when something happened, and she also knew that Valentine had appointed thickly, so he doesn't trust. Lucas explained that with her first, the defense would look at the victim nearby. The assistant knew that according to his information, there must be a suitable yard. Herzog turned his head and saw the letter that had been picked up from the man who was hiding behind the trees. The letter said that the Emperor's orders were passed here to stall. Now it was clear why they were slowing down the trek, but Lucas didn't understand the point of killing time here. He couldn't even imagine what the Emperor was up to. In the meantime, you put the biter fans in. The Count called out to Olivia. She asked what happened at the Emperor's turkey. After all, she had falsely seen His Majesty, in secret from the Emperor. The Count realized that it was not easy to arrange a meeting with the Duke under the present circumstances. After all, she was a young wife and didn't seem to realize it yet. Well, Olivia decided to use her status to remind the Earl that he screwed a Duke, and she's a Duchess, but he's not taking her word for it. The butler wanted to ask Olivia what happened then. He'd been worried when he'd come back soaking wet. She'd been quiet ever since. Even realizing that anger should be directed at the other person, she let her anger go unnecessary and unreasonable. She needed to calm down. After all, she needed to deal with the situation with a cool head. So she decided to explain to the guys what had happened. When some time had passed, the Count remarked that since the plans to meet Princess Serena had initially failed, the man thought they should definitely discuss it with the Duke. So the game still agreed to send Olivia off at dawn. The next day, the ram told Lucas, and that he was speechless because the Emperor had fed the food to the poisonous knight. Only a madman would poison himself once every 2 years, and he had to find an antidote. Lucas realized that in such a case of need, he was even prepared to kill his own knights. Quite a depressing revelation. The Baron saves those lives that have been thrown away. Suddenly, Lucas was approached by a boy, who asked the Duke if he needed anything. After all, he could give him wine and a tour of the village. He could show him a golden rose. Lucas immediately realized it was a sign, that his bride was waiting for him. The Duke told the lieutenant that he needed a guide as he was going to see the town. Na thought that this boy was too young, and it would be better to choose someone more competent. Well then, the Onion replied that the Emperor would send someone, as long as it was Nantenant himself, so he wouldn't have to languish here. After that, the Duke fled into the woods. He hoped the boy was not behind him. The boy himself noticed that only one sister asked to call his knight. The Duke remarked that there was nothing wrong with that. After all, she was his own, and his men would not betray him. At the entrance to the house stood the Count already. Lucas' first thing the president did was to ask why he was here, but before he could explain, the Count asked to go inside. Already inside, Lucas saw Olivia. The first thing she wanted to do was explain. She wanted him to listen because she had something urgent to tell him. She didn't have much time, so I'll get straight to the point. The Emperor is entrusting the Goddess Festival to her. In that case, the plan to meet all the Serena princesses will fail. Lucas understood roughly why she had come. It had to be different. He inquired about the Lion. How is she feeling because she looks very tired? Only she wanted to say that she couldn't say the damn word. After all, she remembered that there were no other concerns besides the princess. She didn't understand. That's why I told Lucas I didn't. It was the first time Lucas had seen Olivia so scared. He didn't know how to handle himself or what to tell her, so he could comfort her. But Olivia said that she's a better person for having met Lucas. Lucas didn't understand what was going on, but he was glad that Olivia was feeling better. And the girl thought that now she could really behave more confidently. I mean, she was thinking how they could turn this crisis into an opportunity. The Emperor's request is actually an order and cannot be refused. But if they do, Olivia, they'll use her to enter the Imperial Palace. After all, if and honestly, she probably only came here to get his approval. She thinks she's going to do well in the Imperial Palace, because Lucas is the first person who trusts her even a little bit. Lucas just realized he could trust when he looked into her eyes. Only the business with the Imperial family temporarily came to her. But only temporarily, and now they had better talk together with Marquis. The girl met a new man. It was Marquis Logan Sergal. This man is a legend in the Foreign Office, the best negotiator in the Empire, and a true loyalist who, after the change of emperor, left the estate and disappeared. Alibek was fascinated that her fiancé had gathered so many famous people. She pressed this man, that she was honored to meet him. Lucas said that the Marquis always had his back when he was up north. Vlad was the reason he could feel safe. The Marquis was doing the right thing, so he was proud of it. According to information received from the Marquis last night, Emperor Gustav has suddenly decided to take up the campaign, that is, detaining Lucas here, and his wife is going to be transferred to the palace. After all, it's common knowledge that since Empress Olivie's death, there's been no proper woman left. But the festival is coming up, but it seems difficult to prepare for it without the Empress. The Lady Eves are not yet the centerpiece of the festivities. Marcus realized that if she did everything right, it would be an admirable score. Otherwise, there was someone to blame for the failure. And as far as the man was concerned, it was Herc's family who would be the sacrificial pawn. However, Lucas thought it was better not to let the dense man do as he pleased. He was the only one going to this place, and Olivia would be alone in the palace for a long time. So they'd have to figure out a way to stay together until they got things sorted out here. Olivia realized that just as she'd suggested to Lucas, she wasn't going to let it go to plan. Find a way to confront him without getting caught in his web. That's what she needed to do now. So she suggested that Lucas make the first move. If the Emperor intended to keep him here in any way, then why not do the opposite by playing the exercise? Suddenly make a raid. A little later, Lucas was already back at the hotel. Lucas first of all asked his assistant Ten now where the Baron was. The guy replied that the king's who had a stomach cramp. He is now. Then, as if on orders, the Baron himself appeared, who asked Lucas what he wanted. Lucas asked how much more time was needed for the treatment. The Baron replied that it would take 1 day for full diction. He also ordered 2 boys to follow him. After all, you can send a messenger to His Majesty. Lucas asked the lieutenant whether he was aware of his doctor's competence. More research is needed to confirm, but the Baron seems to have discovered something interesting, so Lucas intends to report it all to His Majesty as well. The lieutenant promised that she could be punished for her negligence, and Lucas reported that there was a traitor among the knight. The lieutenant was surprised. After all, a traitor infiltrating a squad of knights has a large supply of poison. The lieutenant was shocked. I mean, he knew it was about him, but he'd just been ordered to keep everyone here as long as possible. He couldn't use unconvincing excuses. Lucas saw the lieutenant's Oni face. Pour us a drink. That as soon as Lucas got his hands on a suspicious knight, he'd get his hands on him. And that's the problem. To find out who he is and how many of them there are, they need to get back to the capital. That would be disrespecting His Majesty's commission. You can't just go back, and all plans will be delayed by the poison. However, since they are already here, they need to complete the task quickly. Next, they will go back and find the traitor. The lieutenant realized that at this rate, the poison used wouldn't buy any time. That's why Lucas had this suggestion. They would make a surprise raid for a quick advance. After this meeting with Lucas, Olivier decided to accept the Emperor's request and help him prepare for the festival. Together and quickly, they packed everything they needed to leave for the Imperial Palace as soon as possible. She didn't want to go back to that shippy abode a second time, but she had to. A maid who sat with Olivia in the carriage promised her that she would take care of her. At the imperial palace. This is Olivia's personal maid at the Duke's mansion. Her name is Lena. She was shocked that they were going to the imperial palace. She looked very happy. Eve herself met the guys. She was surprised because she never thought she would be able to meet Olivia in person. Not long before, she spoke to the emperor himself, noting what she never betrayed to him. But now she has no idea what it all means. After all, she didn't understand how he could invite Olivia to their palace without consulting her. Then the emperor reminded her that the Duchess was Eva's insurance. She should consider it was the Empress teaching them. The emperor came close and told Eve that he loved her. She was his woman, but she must not remain in the shadows any longer. Eva herself wanted to be the pride of his majesty. The emperor lived to make her his proud empress. After all, he did not kill the old one with her child with his own hands for nothing. And Eve knows better than anyone how he got here, and he knows full well how disgusting her life has been too. They need to prepare. He can't present a concubine without a title to nobles who humiliate him because of his lineage. Since she understands, then she needs to prepare to meet the Duchess. As the future empress of his rose, Eve herself has correctly pointed out, it's only training for the empress. Even if this woman is good at nothing otherwise, all the mistakes wa on her. He was answered by Olivia, that as Emperor Anard's assistant, that Olivia had agreed to enter the palace for her, and it was her nobility to her. Olivia was very happy to hear that. She thought they all needed to rethink things. Not so long ago they'd expressed their displeasure in the Emperor's arms, but now they recognized that they needed her help. Eve stepped closer to Olivia. After all, she was looking forward to getting help from the Duchess, so Eve asked how Olivia was going to help them. Eva revealed that she wants the title of Empress of the State of Ron. The Emperor is in session. The Emperor asked what the circumstances were. He was answered that they had entered there quickly, making a sudden attack on the 100th of the night. But it rained. It played into the hands of the rebels, and the maneuver fell asleep, the battle now continuing without much success. The Emperor realized the Duke had great intuition, only he was unlucky. It's reported that the storm has passed, but it's still raining heavily in Perth. They're asking for help because there are a lot of wounded. Also the Emperor, that after the harvest this autumn there was the problem of the sun with taxes, but as he had just said, there was a lot of rain. In certain areas the situation has a hurricane. The last rivers and seas were affected by the flood, especially Perth convey that absolutely all the crops have died because of such severe damage. The Emperor did not fully understand why this reason should give the right to pay less tax, so I realized that if I made an exception, other territories would also demand a tax reduction. The new situations of this city should be considered that this situation is solely a consequence of the flood, all the more so in the lives of their people already have a lot of difficulties. But the Emperor stood his ground. The Duchess decided to help Eva prepare for this year's goddess festival. When Eva told Olivia she wanted to be Empress, Olivia didn't laugh. Of course she did. I mean, she's here herself, even though she's a savage. If she wants something, you can't wait for the world to change. You have to change it yourself. Olivia asked if Eve knew how many nobles lived in the Empire. Do they have to listen to those who ignore her and despise their bloodlines? Eva surmised that what the Duchess meant to say was that it was possible to become an empress, even if one didn't get along consciously. Then Olivia told me that the Empress had retained her position under the Stake Emperor, because she was supported by the people of the Empire. Hence, one must become an Empress followed by the common people. Eve realized that she would need to ask the Duchess many times. And also Olivia decided to give something to Eva, and what Eve was surprised, even prepared a gift for her, although the Steve man certainly did not seem. Olivia also noted that the other day there had been a small disturbance at the Imperial Palace. Then His Majesty threw his cloak over her. She should have returned it sooner, but she wasn't feeling well. So he replied, "Why don't you announce it in person?" Olivia replied that she now had Lydia Eva who wouldn't mind helping. And judging by Eva's reactions, Olivia succeeded. So she's hoping that now Eva's suspicions about the relationship are thick, so small that it's not noticeable at all. Small cracks are what she's after. And now Olivia suggested we talk about what we need to do in preparation for the festival. Already in the evening, Eva had asked the Emperor to be released to Perth. When he asked why, she explained that this town was definitely the last place they played the fairies Lawrence found advised the Duchess. A place that has suffered a sudden calamity needs outside attention and help. That's where she could reach out and get support. So she wanted to comfort the people of the empire who had suffered damage due to the disaster. Empress Olivia fed them and built new homes. When the emperor asked why the Duchess was here again, he replied that she was no longer here, and if anyone notices her place, it must be only Eve. She can't live forever as Lady Eva, for she knows nothing of the nobles who are kind to her. But behind her back they say nasty things about her ancestry. It's a chance. The emperor said it's not that simple. Now the city of Kishi is being rebelled, but she'd realize then more dramatically. The emperor's despised woman, risking her own life, set out to rescue the empire from hopelessness. Overjoyed, His Majesty's knights let her hold victory by the time she arrives. Then she will be called the Goddess of Victory. The emperor realized that there was a grain of truth in this by turning the whole thing around to besiege the nobles, who were about to become Empress Eva. After all, this is also the preparation for the festival. On the day of the festival, people in the square will praise the name of His Majesty, and Eve as well. 2 subjects of the emperor asked for his favor. Even the peasants could revolt at this rate, and if the station manages to use the situation to its advantage, it will spiral out of control. So the guys were suggesting to reduce the duties on those villagers affected by the disaster, and provide them with food if possible. The emperor asked the boys how they would confuse the idea of sending Eve there. After all, it would be foolish to send only food. Then one of the subjects said that it's not a bad idea. If Eva takes on the role of Empress Olivia, you will be able to help her in the future. The emperor didn't know what to do. He is very happy that Herzog is facing difficulties outside the capital. But how things will change with the arrival of Eva in the city is unknown on the other hand. If nothing is done, the farmers there with their problems can help Herzog. It is certainly impossible to allow him to send the paper, but it is better that way than to disgrace him by earning influence. For the servants, it was a chance to distinguish themselves before the birth before. Already in the carriage, Eva did not understand why she was shaking so much. All her clothes were wrinkled and her hair was disheveled. Looking at Olivia, she noticed that the Duchess was not uncomfortable. She was used to living outside the imperial palace and dressed more conservatively. Well then, Olivia said, what would people think if the man who came to help them was dressed up in fancy clothes and brought his maids with him? After all, a maiden, she should understand the feelings of the peasants better than anyone else. He was reminded of his past again, and in Tokar blood itself, I'm sure I've never seen such clothes, and their circumstances are hardly different, so sometimes she didn't understand the Duchess. Are they friends or foes? Well, as they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. At last they arrived in town. They were met by the lieutenant, who was pleased to welcome Eva. He would accompany them to the village. Suddenly, the carriage was left rumbling because the wheel disappeared into a hole. It also broke when it fell into the mud. Olivia offered to get out and walk. The village was very close, so they'd get there faster than waiting for the mending. Eva certainly didn't want to walk. Then yes, I explained to you that it would be wise to meet people as soon as possible. If she went to them in a carriage instead of with the maids, it wouldn't look good. Olivia started shouting at Eve. She dares to think of happening without Empress Olivia her with that attitude. Does she really think that class is her place and so easy? After all, the first one to go outside would get their attention, but she even wanted to sit here. After these words, he did get out of the carriage. When she saw the people, she mentioned that it was a great shame and suggested to return to the village quickly. There everyone would have enough to eat. People finally all smiled together. One boy asked his mum, "Who is this woman?" The woman herself did not know what kind of lady was standing in front of them. The boy asked if she would give them bread. His mum said yes, but the boy thought it would be better to give the bread to the knights on the hill. They had shared it with him yesterday, and today too they were certainly very hungry. When Eve heard all this, she asked the lieutenant what was on the hill. The lieutenant said there were knights behind it. The rebels are quite far from the settlement. Also, the other day they went to storm the village and took the knights right up to there. Asked the Duke, who must not be far away. The Duchess's witch must be concerned about him, but all that remains is to believe in him and wait. Then Eva suggested we go there, and do not appreciate the peasants, but it is the knights who fight for their empire. Olivia replied that twilight would soon fall, and it would be dangerous to move around without the military leader's instructions. But she realized that she was the most important person here. She answered in the negative that His Majesty would be doubly pleased if they saw the knights and thanked them for their service, and so she rides with the Duke there. then bails the horses and food for the nights. Eve realized that the fresh air was very nice after the carriage. Olivier thought they'd better turn back. Then Eve wondered why if they had already moved out. Quickly they'd go up and give the provisions and come back. We must think of the hungry nights. Even the lieutenant remarked that Lady Eve was right. If you don't linger, nothing will happen. Olivia saw that there were many knights around. The Emperor certainly cares for Lady Eve. On her, most likely escaped from the battle themselves, Lucas certainly would not give such an order. That is, not now in the company of those who obey exceptionally densely. Already in the forest, Eve could see nothing. The lieutenant said he would light a torch and warned her to be careful. Or not, Olivia saw the rebels over the hill. Well, when we got the torch, Olivia asked us to put it out, because the station's right under the mountain. The Knights of Straight-Art appeared and asked her to mow the fire, but they were nailed by the lieutenant, and explained that Lady Eve was worried about the knights and personally traveled all the way here, so they needed to be honorable. Deputy Lucas explained that they were on a battlefield where you can't predict where danger lies, then ordered them to put out the fire. Lucas also appeared and asked what was going on here. Then the lieutenant explained that Eva had brought food to feed the knights. She had come to visit the Kiesels, but heard about their hardships and decided to climb the hill. Eva walked over to Lucas. I heard how he was in the head of the mission and he was having a hard time, and His Majesty was very worried. Lucas replied that if they were so excited, then it wasn't better to stay and have tea in the cozy house. Lucas ordered him to ask for a torch, but the lieutenant wasn't going to because the lady wasn't much. Lucas realized that the faint sound of water was getting louder, and it was about to start. He had to deal with it quickly, so he asked the clerk if he wanted the torch to drink them all. Then Olivia herself personally approached Eve and told her that they had met the knights as she wanted, and now they had to go back. It's getting dangerous everywhere. Then Eva remarked that the Duke had changed his attitude towards his wife, since he could not see that his Duchess had also traveled such a long way. Not even a year had passed since their wedding. Eva had hoped for a passionate kiss, and she certainly hadn't expected that. She wanted so much to see how much love Herzog, since he married in secret even from the Emperor. But now it is not clear if the rumors are true. After that, the boys were attacked. The lieutenant was wounded by an arrow. Suddenly there was a flood. All around, the ground shook and the knights began to fall down the hill. Olivia knew she had to do whatever it took to prevent the climb up here. The only thing left to do now was to run away. So Olivia saw a picture of Eve holding onto one branch, and asked for help. Only the branch snapped. Eve had already grabbed the Olivia itself. Lucas ordered everyone to run, but he was also worried about where his wife was. Olivia didn't know what I was doing. She's being pulled down, and the vibrations are about to collapse. This plan would have succeeded if they weren't here. If she hadn't had the idea to climb up here, it's better to just drop her. But Eve begged to be helped. Olivia herself knew it was too soon, but her strength was running out. Then Lucas grabbed Eva's arm and dragged them along. Olivia was bleeding, for she had rubbed her arm and it hurt, but Lucas decided to bandage it as well. He ordered her to take the Duchess and the lady back. Olivia realized that Lucas always fights alone on the battlefield, always trudging through the powerful darkness alone, even stripped of his throne and everything. He still is. Alone and ancient, for whom or for what he sacrifices himself, and whether or not he should be helped. Olivia was tormented by that question. When Olivia was on her way back early, she was getting stronger and stronger. When Olivia went inside the house, she saw the villagers. They immediately became concerned about Olivia, and decided to feed her and help her. One of the residents noticed that the people they arrived with had left their belongings in another house. They have yet to be brought here. So far there is only this clean and washed. Olivia was surprised. Navid's clothes were too expensive for Christian. She offered her the best one they had. It was nice of her. A little later, after Olivia had changed, she was asked if she had finished. That's when you have to pay attention to the wound. But Olivia said she was fine, and not to worry, it's better to tell her where Olivia is. Eve was told that the knight took her straight to the inn. It'll come in handy soon enough, so I'll leave it that way. It's not worth bothering that woman unnecessarily. It's a good place to start their plan. And Olivia reported that she thought during the meal, and needs a bigger boiler and people capable of working. She shouldn't ask for too much, though, just trying to pay for the warmth and kindness with which they've welcomed her. The next morning, the knights were coming down, which Olivia called them. She asked. Leonidas had breakfast. She was answered positively some had already gone to the dam. Some were waiting in the open section of the village. Then, they were to do as she asked. The first down the hill are sure to be the wounded knights and those who help them walk. There in the open area, they are met by men ready to help. They direct the knights to the prepared barracks where they are given warm potato soup to remove their hunger. Lucas's aide doesn't understand what's going on here. Then a servant explained that the Duchess had asked the knights to be brought here. The severely wounded are immediately placed in the pre-empted houses of the villagers, while the tired ones rest and gain strength in the barracks. There was a semblance of organization after that. With the knights sorted out, it was time to take care of the village and its inhabitants. Well, Lucas showed up out of the blue, who was really worried about her getting hurt. Olivia was surprised that Lucas was wet. She didn't understand why. More importantly, he's covered in blood and soil. She'd never seen him like this before, and she'd be able to. So he touched his face and said what he thought. Now was not the time to worry about her earlier. He had a tired look himself, even more tired than she had looked then. She wanted to comfort him with those words now, with everything as he had done for her in the past. And yet the first thing that struck her was the encouragement she'd asked him not to be angry. She's very glad because he's not screaming and writhing in pain in one of those barracks, because he didn't go Percy the long and stormy river for fun. She can confirm that the one who is far away has returned alive to her. You are her embrace, and able to feel her body. He didn't know why. He demurred at the sight of his wounded arm. It happened quickly, before he could tell himself to calm down. The Marquis had told him once that in order to deceive others, one must supplement one lie with another, and in order to deceive oneself as well, one must mix it with the truth. The relation began, with separate feelings, and Persuasion, however, did not know whether now the confidence could declare that his present action and meaning were also spurious. A succession of emotions turn imperceptibly into truth, the boundary between it and lies disappearing. It's as if they were blurred by the rain of the sea, blending everything into one. So he realizes it's not the time, but it's a matter of being alone or he's going mad. So he reported on Libya that such a hug is definitely a doubt concerning their relationship as well. Lucas said he needed to clean up some dirt, and Olivia promised she'd have everything ready. Olivia walked in on Eva. Olivia inquired how Eva was feeling. She responded positively, but the woman realized that Olivia had been hurt because of her. Olivia thought that even if Eva hadn't fully recovered, she should go in to see people. After all, the lady hadn't forgotten the reason she'd come to town. She was doing it for a purpose. Ava went to pack up what she was going to change into to go out to the people. Olivia called out to Emma. The woman herself had run all of Olivier's errands in the village, so she asked what she should do next. Olivia praised Emmy. She said she's being replaced by Lady Eve. Already on the street, Eva was asked what they should do next. People asked if they would be given things and tools to repair the dam. Ava was surprised they needed anything else. After all, she had thought that from the outside it would just be enough to come. She didn't know how she was supposed to know and deal with all these aspects. She had no idea. And where to get these tools? Eve ordered yes to the residents. Ava didn't understand why the villagers looked at her with a slanted gaze. It was time they bowed their heads to her. You are grateful for her generosity. The residents began to explain that a couple of tools were not enough to repair the platinum, and the woman also pointed out that the children would soon be hungry, and there would be no food for dinner at this rate. So they wondered if the Duchess was here now. The Baron stood outside the knight's chamber. He realized that you were in such a state to people whose lives had become a survival of the fittest decision. The Duchess is amazingly savvy and present, appeared when the people needed organization, brought the rudiments of order, and disappeared, leaving the settlement paralyzed. So the man realized that she had planned it after all. The girl herself didn't carry the clothes and the manner and the medicine. She put on that she hadn't forgotten anything for Lucas. The girl knocked on the door and saw Lucas naked. After that, her things fell out of her hand. She saw all of Lucas's scars and cuts. After that, she came to her senses. She apologized and got him some clothes. Suddenly, Lucas himself had a thought. Since now's not a great opportunity to find out how she feels about him. He asked her if she had any healing ointment in her basket, because while Lucas was washing himself, the wounds where the water had got on them had started to hurt. He couldn't reach them himself, so he asked her for help. Olivier has seen a half-naked man before. She's no longer a melted girl, but for some reason she can't look at him calmly. All he asked me to do was smear. She couldn't open the box because her hands were shaking. Because of the excitement. All these emotions, winter has not yet arrived while the room feels warm, and the sun's rays are especially bright today, which makes it illuminate his body better. She realized it was about them. Looking at it reminds her that she is an adult. Sometimes she is even surprised because she has a lot of memories from her childhood. Such conscious touching of the body causes, not less on the arm, shame. She didn't know what Lucas would think if he knew she was remembering that young teenager. So you've been acting weird. Lucas gritted his teeth. Olivia saw this and asked if it hurt because she had touched him. She said no, because the cuts themselves hurt. Olivia understood. It makes sense that it's the human wounds that cause the pain. Now that the sight of so many mutilations allowed her thoughts to stagnate, she's starting to see what's really important. It's like seeing the thorny path he's traveled since losing his throne. Olivia touched his body. She realized that he'd been through a lot. He'd lost so much, but he still hadn't given up. The goddess had no doubt been watching him, what he'd done for the Empire. And that's why Olivia's so confident that she'll do what Lucas wants. She'll pray to her for that. Lucas was very surprised. He had heard those lines all throughout his childhood. The year he had become interested in the life of farmers and helped take care of the animals on the farm there had been a harsh winter, causing some of them to freeze to death from the cold. Then spring came and he kept crying and Olivia came up to him. She called the same words to Ginya, undoubtedly watched him what he did, and so the little girl was sure that the goddess would help to fulfill his wish. After all, the girl herself wanted all animal creatures to flourish in the Empire, and she in turn would pray that this would happen. Lucas still didn't fully understand even if Olivia was now familiar with the Empress. As close friends, she couldn't repeat her words exactly. Then abruptly stood up and reminded Lucas that he should stand and go. The soup was also brought into the house, and she would now organize the earrings. Emma was looking for the Duchess. Well, other people were sure she wouldn't help them anymore. But really, Olivia just fell asleep in her room, and that's what the maids saw. They realized that the poor Duchess had never been under such strain, and she was badly hurt too. She'd been up all night, had only eaten a bowl of potato soup, and hadn't had much rest. And the best solution was to leave it alone and let it rest for a while. At the same time, the Duke met with his right-hand man. His aide told him how the Duke himself instructed him to check on the lieutenant's condition. His arm is badly damaged but not life-threatening. Lucas realized how unfortunate, however, he is an important witness in their case. Thassa's gusto at his words about the disaster. She has the lives of even his knights. A little later, Lucas will visit him too, to see how the Litka feels. The aide also noticed that there was news from the Duchess herself. Livia herself woke up in the night where Lucas was standing next to her. He noticed that she seemed very tired, so he apologized for waking her up. But he wanted to show her something. Outside were baskets filled with food, potatoes and carrots, and dried meats and fruit. Food seemed unappointed, but in that village they're on Wizo. Herb flowers are all brought to her by the villagers. Lucas said that they'd recently been told that a messenger from the Count had arrived. It was Olivia who requested them. Provisions and medical supplies. That's not easy to pull off behind thick backs. They all disguised it as a request for the festival. And the dispatch was not made by 100 and the Earl's efforts. No matter how many people helped, it's too risky. That's why Lucas wondered whose idea it was. Olivia said that the idea was accepted by all and unanimously. The situation in the city made it necessary to organize this support from outside. Lucas didn't believe at all that she served the Empress. She was just as brave. Sometimes she's just like the real Empress. After Lucas diverted the topic to what Olivia would do with this stuff, I assume it's a favor to her from the villagers. Delivering food supplies to the peasants was expected to be a problem for them, so Olivia secretly made a mess of the list of goods and their quantities and locations. And it's important to get the record-keeping right, otherwise I won't have any time to present a bunch of stuff later. Olivia realized it was probably someone else's food and should be returned. But if she went to the village, she'd have to use Lady Eve's orders. Lucas remembered that Olivia couldn't cook, so he said he'd look into it. By the way, he asked Olivia if she could cook because he'd never seen her cook on the estate. She answered in the negative. People were discussing again how the Duchess had gone through all that horrible and dangerous way on the hill, but still organized the inhabitants to be comfortable, and helped them all. And the Duchess, She must have had a very terrible time. After all, the woman didn't expect that. They also wondered if the Duchess was coming tomorrow. After all, now one of them needed some supplies since she got nothing at all. Ava told me that tomorrow she will bake and distribute bread to the peasants, so we need all that afterwards. Lens realized that she was already having a crazy day with the imperial goods brought in, so she didn't understand what Eve was up to. So the Countess said that there was a problem with the book in which the goods were kept. She was speechless, believing that she was also responsible for the management of the goods. Besides, you can't predict when it's going to rain in the city again. If the grain brought in gets wet and spoils, it'll be a disaster. So the Countess thought she might be the best one to call the Duke. But Eve didn't believe that woman was so necessary. After all, interacting with her and now uncomfortable on the hill, she had kept her to the last. Even got hurt because of it. Not just probably could have shaken her up at any moment, but why did you decide to help? She's a wobble thanks to her, but she doesn't realize. So in that case, she wanted to ask the Countess something. More specifically, to ask if the Countess really thought the Duchess was helping Eva. The Duchess began to remember herself when she spoke to Olivia. She realized that there is an opportunity everything does not appear to create it herself, so the Countess does not want to stay in the current position any longer. And that's what it's all about. So she responded positively. So the Countess reminded me that the Duke had become a wife. She's neglected only by the nobility, and among the commoners she is treated differently. The Duchess is a simple woman who has broken out of her status and cares for people. He was also reminded of the Olivier's words. After all, she had said that if Eva wanted to become empress, she needed to gain their favor. In other words, someone who is hardly different from them in terms of status has managed to become a duchess. And the object of no evil envy from the good, it must be the very Eve. After all, to know this cherished place, then it should be Eve, not the Duchess, who should take over the place. Then there was to use the Duchess as an account. He realized that the woman who had won his love, if she loved him so much, she didn't understand why she didn't throw herself into his arms on that hill. There is clearly an awkwardness between them. If the love that's won is not real, she can't be envied. Eve was shown the house where the Duchess was staying. Now she was determined to find out if the two were really as madly in love as the rumors said. After Eva opened the door half naked, Lucas was outraged at who decided to interrupt the newlyweds. After all, it's not the most honorable thing to do. Eve said it was time to see the Duchess. It's urgent. When Eva went inside the house, she saw a half-naked Olivier. Why was she surprised? After all, this woman is capable of making such a wish, and in Lucas himself you can read such sincere love and embarrassment. Lucas replied, AJ, that the Duchess hadn't expected the sudden visit and had just woken up. He therefore thought it best for Eve to return to the inn. Ava realized that His Majesty had never treated her like this, so she told Lucas that she would wait outside after all. He did not understand, for he was trying to decide how the lady who had rudely invaded where the Hercules of the Empire had settled. I also wonder what people would think of such ignorance of the only women of the Empire. And Lucas clarified that he's not asking for orders to go back. Eve apologized and said she had been disrespectful. Duke, the thought of the future restoration of the Empress helps bring the current respect. You just have to wait, and Lucas will be on his knees before her. Olivia walked out of her room. Lucas asked and still didn't understand how he'd managed to see her off with that attitude. Olivia replied that it was human nature to adjust to the situation. It was especially true for those like Eva, who had the hat of her position. She also thanked for alerting the attentive Amy, otherwise there would have been trouble. Already later, Olivia herself personally came to her to ask her what she wanted then in the early morning. He was informed that it seems the noble Duchess had forgotten the purpose of coming to the city and had betrayed her love games. Eve wondered if the Duchess had saved the peasants here on His Majesty's orders. Now it looked as if she didn't care about them at all. Olivia replied that she remembered perfectly well what she was doing here and why, but Eve would not tell who had made the soup and pitched the tents that very evening when Lady Eve was out of breath. And when Lady Eve woke up, not she herself had stepped aside to avoid the misunderstanding. And now him demanding something else from Olivia. I told her that Olivia should help her. That's why she needed to be there for her. So I went on to recall the moment when they went up the hill together, who held Lady Eve's hand and didn't let go until the end. And no Duchess in 1,000 years of history has ever had so much help from the Emperor's government. If she does not wish to orochi the imperial throne, Ava must realize the fallacy of her accusations. Olivia asked the Countess what the real reason for her visit to her this morning was after all. Eva ordered me to give her the documents. Olivia realized that Eva had to survive until the very end to live and watch Olivier destroy her. Olivia also asked that a woman named Emma be brought to her. After all, they'd get the supplies as soon as they'd solved the food problem, then send everything to the people who were repairing the platinum. And it was Eve who did it. A maid will bake the bread, but a noblewoman or a lady will distribute it. Olivia's just a reminder to Eve not to forget, so they'll start now. The two men showed their Nellie right in front of Mistress. They thanked her for the ass she gave them. They were able to eat enough. Also, the two men did not know how to repay the Duchess for her kindness without the help of the Mistress, and the Duke would take a long time to recover from all that had happened. Olivia realized it wasn't worth it. It was without all of their help that nothing would have been possible. Olivia also threw on a scarf. It was a keepsake, and so Olivia hoped that fate would allow them to meet again. But if Emma hadn't brought her to her and saved her that day, today's miracle wouldn't have happened. The miracle that the Duchess and the Herts have wrought. In the city and before that, she was always afraid of the nobility. She will never forget the kindness of the lady and the Duke. For a moment, Olivia was called away by Graphia herself. Already in private, the Countess recalled that conversation. The manner. When Countess Lawrence gave time to consider the decision, to observe and decide if the alibi itself could help her. And now Olivia realized that Lawrence was ready to give her answer. True to form, she answered as she captured the hearts of the villagers. Lawrence had gained confidence. Countess DEI will not whistle anything, if Dasha will continue to be afraid to stay near the leading Eva. Or maybe she'll get used to it and spend the rest of her life like that. Like Olivia advised, you have to try to create the long-awaited moment yourself, so she agreed to those terms. I never know what's going to happen next. Just to think of her returning to the Imperial Palace, you are escorted by the Duke. Eva had noticed that as soon as they arrive and she wants to do nothing at all and just relax. When they return, they must hand you over to the families of the dead. The Emperor ordered the search for the missing, but it's Lady Eve's job to find their families. It would all definitely help her recovery as Empress, she was sure. Eva also noted that she would pick up some new clothes. Olivia was surprised because Eva was supposed to do it for the festival. Eva told me that before the festival there's a hunter's competition, and it was named after Eva. Olivia didn't know what the woman was talking about because it's unheard of, to take a life right before a sacred goddess festival. Eve replied that their side was ruled by His Majesty. A hunt during the festival when the goddess is thanked for a safe year is also named in honor of love. The church would hardly approve of such a thing under normal circumstances. So Eva hoped that His Majesty would shoot her a beautiful white fox, but Olivier's anxious feelings did not leave him. After all, he did not realize what he was planning to throw out thickly. The boys arrived at the Imperial Palace. The Duke and Duchess welcomed them to the Emperor, and also the Emperor ordered the others to go rest, for they would have to be told everything later. Olivia threw a punch. The Emperor did not pay respect to the knight who had returned from the draft, nor did he even organize a greeting ceremony. Also, Olivia said, about the hunter competition, but Lucas was more worried that they would somehow try to split them up together, even if prepared for that, as Lucas didn't know how they would talk about what had happened in town. Well, in that case, Olivia had an idea. Only before Olivia asked Lucas to play the more affectionate spouse at tomorrow's meeting. The next day, a meeting of the government. The Emperor wanted to get straight to the point. Instead of greetings today, the meeting hall seems to be packed with many people. The Emperor had us hear about the next interaction in the city. After all, the Duke has done the job time after time without complications. Olivia realized that His Majesty had taken compassion on the city and answered to Eve. Otherwise, the Duchess herself would not have traveled there, so it was all to his credit. Everyone around realized that the Duchess was right in saying that any talent was worthless unless it was properly discharged. Assalam Olivia, the Emperor realized that everything had gone wrong. After all, the deed the Herzog did in the city. They say they spread throughout the empire, described as a miracle. But he still can't quite understand how it happened. The dam bursting ended up killing both the rebels downstairs and the knights upstairs. It's also impossible to find the cases. Interestingly, many of the missing are named Imperial Knights, for they must have heard the voices of children crying in loss, of fathers and all mothers pouring tears for their sons. So the Emperor asked Lucas if his plan was to breach the dam. The earth was soaked by lingering rains. Lucas replied that he was ashamed that he was unable to predict natural disasters. Well, as Lucas reported, there was no problem with the knight's deployment. However, there was more damage from the unexpected arrival of Lady Eve. The Emperor's wife's actions, although she herself was wounded, became a liability. The enemy was able to detect the knight's ambush. Excellent. Judging by the reaction, the scratch on his body was more important than the failed plan. That's why Levato thought it would be a good time to seize the opportunity. She interrupted the Emperor. And Olivia's strength that no matter what the outcome, it's a shame that a woman got hurt in the process. Whenever she thinks about it, she becomes more and more convinced that it's not the Emperor who should be with Eve, which makes it worse to announce that she's going back to the Duke's residence. After all, the Emperor himself has agreed and needs to go too. She wants to rest at home with the Duke, her husband. So Olivia showed her wound, so that everyone would be convinced, and it turns out the rumors of her injury trying to save Lady Eve were true. Now that doesn't seem easy for a woman. You gotta hand it to her courage too. One man said that it is not advisable to leave the imperial palace now because the festival of the goddess is about to take place. The Duchess is the ruler of such a thing, and it will be known to everyone in the empire. Well, actually, the Count had a different solution. After all, it's better for the Duke to stay in the imperial palace too. There are other aristocrats living here now, after all. The Emperor saw that Olivier was no longer cherished. He didn't understand why it was so, but he thought it was because her fiancé was near her. And his fear has no effect on her. Gusto didn't know who she was or that she was different. In the past, she had tried to endure his icy stare and cold tone because she had promised to tolerate him and live. As Empress to the people now, she asked herself what he would do. Can a decent excuse to separate them? One man didn't want a situation here based solely on rumors, and everyone needed to calm down. Then the Earl recalled that Lady Eve was the first to complain about the darkness, and asked for a torch to be lit. Lady Eva had traveled all the way to help the injured Selenium. Nothing would have happened, Hert's teeth would have crushed the rebels faster. The Emperor would not listen to these arguments. After all, everyone seemed to have forgotten about his presence. The Emperor remarked that he saw how the Duke didn't even blink an eye when his wife was wounded. And then Lucas replied that the Emperor was wrong, because he was really disappointed in himself because he had failed to protect his wife, and she had to go through something she should not have had to go through. And after bitter regrets, he felt nobly what a friend might have been beside himself after all that had happened. The Emperor realized that the Duchess was lucky to have such a loving Duke, and Livia herself has noticed that it's true, and that's why she never wants to break up with him again. The Marquis wanted to share a different opinion. He didn't think it was right to leave the two of them together, because they would forget where they were. Well, that's why Olivia suggested we go back to the Duke's mansion, as long as I didn't cause him any further inconvenience. And during this difficult time, she would want to be by her fiancé's side, although the Emperor realized that the Duke still had a lot of business to attend to, and going back and forth would cause unnecessary trouble. First of all, it is necessary to find out the cause of the dam breakage. The future Empress was almost killed, and the Duchess was also wounded. Plus, they'll have to find the missing body to determine if it was an accident or a premeditated murder, so they'll prepare the Duchess a separate resting place in the palace. It's his responsibility because he forced the Duchess to do something she didn't want to do. Olivia answered in the negative, for she was content to have the Duke by her side. Olivia ran after Lucas outside, asking why he was angry, but Lucas replied that she realized she'd planned it all along. After all, he thought she didn't have time to treat the wound, but it turns out she left it like that on purpose. He can see that she's up to something, but he didn't expect her to do this. A girl who writes to move forward needs to raise the stakes. But the Onion didn't fully understand what the point would be if it ended up being Olivia herself who was faking it, or if it was all deliberate. He doesn't know if it's worth it. He called the Baron first to shame him into treating her before the official moved to the palace while they stopped by the manor. The palace apologized, but told me he was on a case he'd assigned before his quest, regarding Domina. On the day of the hasty wedding, he asked for an investigation. It took a long time because everyone couldn't find the information. And something like this is only as per him. It's strange he put everything on paper, and Lucas himself could read it. It turns out that there was one piece of information on the paper that differed from Olivier's own story. As the lady said, she was the shadow of Empress Olivier, so she lived in the south, and there should have been at least some trace of her, but he could not find any significant information about her in the southern parts of the empire. She was described as a strange woman, who seems to have recently escaped from the north. The man said he'd never seen her before. Given this is the Empress's shadow, mistress is true. If she really came south recently, there's no way she could be serving Olivier. But looking at the similarities in their behavior, they're definitely related. So he didn't realize who she really was. Your gut already suspects that Olivia is real, but he has to be sure. Only Lucas surrendered to the question of how she was able to change her body. If it was even possible to become a completely different person. In such cases he had heard only in fairy tales that he read as a child or legend. But if you find a reliable clue that it is possible. So Lucas ordered his assistant to investigate something else, one last time. The couple had already been welcomed at the palace. They were greeted by Butler Heron. He was sent here from the Empress's palace. He was with them during her stay. Only there's no sign that he recognized her. That's what it means to be forgotten. Linder is a small palace next to the pink one, and reminders of spring everywhere, wet with freshness. Olivia didn't know if she'd be allowed to enter the palace, but here they were, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. They were escorted to their resting place. In case of anything, you had to call him at any time. And they were given one bed for two. Both of them decided not to go straight to bed, but to take a walk. When they sat down together, Lucas remarked that he hadn't expected to get back to the Imperial Palace so quickly, all thanks to Olivia. After all, Lucas has had his deposits taken away from him. He sat here, but now he's back in it, and somehow he has a feeling that his Tusk hope will actually come true. A sheep came into the room. He had been told where to find the boys, and they were here. He warned Olivia that if she checked her health again, he, as a doctor, would not tolerate it. He warned Olivia that if she checked her health again, he, as a doctor, would not tolerate it. And now there will be consequences. Because of the neglected medication situation, they need a lot of sleep, so get someone to lie next to her. I was right, because Vivi was really sleepy in here. She rested her head on Lucas's shoulders. Lucas had already seen the fever in Olivia overnight, and saw that there was a spot next to him. But Lucas couldn't lie next to Olivia. He realized that it was confusing, because without her, he already felt empty, maybe even dependent on her and unable to live as he had before she came along, which could be painful. He didn't know what to do if she was really Olivia, or if it wasn't like that. "What a time," Serena asked. "How's her brother doing at the Imperial Palace?"